sorry, the offerings that were, no, it was separate from the normal collections. Again, the status, the amounts that were contributed were read out with the top people of the parish at the top. So it went, in the 50s, a pound was the top, and a pound was an awful, down to, 1 and 6. So all the offerings and the amount, the names and the amounts are read out. And now I didn't hear this, but I wasn't there at that, but there was one priest and he'd gone through the list and then he decided on the codicil, and he had Miss Christie blank, Mr. Graham blank, and worked down all the names in the parish that
incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Just, I suppose, that's a form of entertainment in its own right. Other characters, can you remember any special entertainers of a voluntary nature around the place? Characters, people who amused others?
I'm not sure.
James Shaw was a lively character in a manner of speaking.
Yeah. But of course Shaw's in those days, of course, was a spit and sawdust place. It was, just one bar. I gather, of course, I'd never. I was only a teenager then, but I gather they wouldn't have such things as ashtrays or any like that, as everybody smoked. The floor was, I gather, when, if closing time was observed, but Rose Shaw and the old lady, very Victorian looking, in her, she always wore black and her white silver hair pulled back in a bun, but she only had to make an appearance and everybody would move. I would hear the stories, as a youngster, but of course one thing that was, again, custom in those days, there was a law, it seems, that outside licensing hours, if you were outside your own district, as a bona fide traveller, you were entitled to refreshment. So what I gather would happen when the pub closed in Summerhill, cycle to Rathmaline, and then you qualified for another hour's drinking because you're a bona fide traveller. I think an overall impression of Summerhill in the 50s, there was such poverty. I don't think people were aware of that it was the norm. At school, I remember going back to Dangan, the children from the bog, from Isaacstown that way, it was Wellington boots, rubber boots in winter and bare feet in summer, and there was no exception. That was the norm. Barefooted, very poorly clad. When you think, make a comparison with today, and of course in Patricia's house, 2 First Communions in the next couple of weeks. The communion then wasn't really a big event. And, I can remember Mrs. Connor down the New Road, Anne and Louis. I know it would have been confirmation, but more or less the same type of thing. In the post office buying a length of material and making up 2 dresses and getting a length of net curtaining, and that did for the veils, and it's of twine and some petals or flower, but pure lowest budget, because they didn't have the money, and in that family, and it was the case in many families, of the poorest, where the provider is an alcoholic, and that was the case there, because he had to be taken from the ditch. I don't believe if the done thing then was for the man to hand his wage packet to her husband. I don't think Mrs. Connor ever saw the wage packet intact. So you had people that were, and now there were 5 girls, 3 boys, so she had 8 children, 8 and so what did they do? Made the most of the garden they had with the vegetables, and again it was the same. There were potatoes, there were cabbages, and onions. And that was, I think that was pretty general. But there were no luxuries that, as we know today. It was difficult. It was very difficult.
You remember Tarty or Harriet Fitzsimons?
I remember. Well, you couldn't forget Harty, Aunt Harriet, her daughter. Harty, well, of course, she had such a loud voice, and I remember Barney Fitzsimons. I would go into him, I'd be about 10, I suppose, that time, for a haircut. And they mentioned we were going to, it was 20 Mary then in Galway, going to Galway the following day. He said, "I'm glad you told me that. I'll give you the Galway Touch." And what he gave me was, well, it'd be very fashionable today, more or less skimmed me around it. It was practically shaven around the lower end. And I didn't see anything like it in Galway. But, Barney, yes, and Harty. Well, Harty, of course, again, those days,
Did you witness an incident where she had to report on the behaviour of a couple of lads?
Oh God, yes, I know what you're talking about. Now Mrs. Austin, now she was a very proper woman and a very outspoken one, and her family were perfect. They were models. And so Mrs. Austin goes into the post office one morning, and Summerhill post office in those days, you had absolute chaos. They wouldn't have thought of it as that, but you had 4 postmen sorting the letters in that space. You had the odd ones coming in. Well, if you wanted a stamp, you better be prepared to wait an hour. But everything was slow motion. But Mrs. Austin went in, place crowded, and Harty was there, and Harty turned on me, and you've got shock and bold children. And to Mrs. Austin, what an insult. She knew she hadn't. And well, they called me names. And what did they call you? She went on and on and on. Harty wouldn't say. And then somebody said, well, they call me Harty Farty. And I remember Mrs. Austin told me later, she was so humiliated. She said she went out of there. And she said, but when I got back, and of course, that would be the usual thing with Tom. I mean, I'm sure I told you this about him coming from school, and he dared me call Mrs. Clark Portonose, which I obligingly did, and lucky to get away with my life when she followed. But it's the type of thing that Tom Austin would do all the time. But I don't think his mother would have believed.
After Summerhill, then you moved on again.
Well, after Summerhill, it was London.
What year was that?
1957. 1957. And yeah.
Any memorable travels you want to mention?
I know that comes into another.
And your general experiences over there, relative to here?
Oh, at that time, yes. I mean, it was very difficult. There was a mass exodus of Irish at that time because there was simply no employment here. And you know, what I do suspect was quite a cover-up. You know, for example, with all the big companies, you know, our government, you know, for instance, the Civil Service, the Dublin Board of Assistance, the corporation, ESB, Aer Lingus, they would advertise for clerical officers or whatever, and decision will be taken on an examination. The exams were, I suppose, leaving cert standard, and you go to Dublin. I remember I did was in Cattle Brewers Street, and it depended on success, or that's what you were told. I don't believe there were any jobs going, and I remember one. It was the ESB, and I remember feeling, I didn't on the others, but that the papers were quite simple, easy anyway. I felt that was perfect. I knew everything, and then you get the letter back, and you're placed for 100 and something. Like hell. I don't think there were anything going, but from policy point, from government, it had to make it look as though the unemployment situation was being dealt with as far as these people are concerned. But it was a very, very difficult time, and the thing, when you think of so many Irish then that went to England and to work as navvies or whatever, you know, the lowest area. Well, the resentment that caused in England, because, I mean, the Irish were all drunkards, they were all, you know, there was tremendous bias then. And you know, I remember the first weeks. Well, it was Miles who helped me, but trying to get work of any kind of clerical work that I was looking for, and I can remember in one case, this snooty actually saying, "Oh, you can read and write. You must be a novelty over there." It's just unbelievable, but everything was a sneer, and the Irish were good food for musical comedy, but totally useless. And but the bias, it wasn't just towards Irish. It was there was racism, left, right, and centre, and the attitude was, well, we are the superior. We're superior in everything. They were absolutely well indoctrinated. So, in fact.
Did that change over the years?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Did it just change for you, or did it change for everyone?
I believe it changed forever. Of course, you'll hear individuals with different stories, but what I often thought was strange, at the time that of the Troubles and the bombings in London and so forth, that when it felt the English had good reason, I never experienced a single. There was never a single incident, and even in conversations I ever had. Well, of course, they're absolutely furious that this was happening, but there seemed to be a more mature attitude that it's individuals, not. You can't blame on everyone what certain individuals are doing. But there were, of course, in the 70s. God, what was his name? Was it Robinson? The comedian. Who made a whole career out of racial jokes. Well, it was the West Indies, but the Irish really got. And I remember being told, whether it's true or not, did you hear Mrs. Thatcher wants to bring in a bill that would make telling Irish jokes illegal, and but it appears that the subject was being discussed, because it had got completely out of hand, because to the average, to the man in the street at that time, every Irishman without exception was thick as you could possibly find. And there were those that, yes, I was aware of, who actually believed that, and of course I like to think the majority over there are fairly intelligent, and but the worst period I experienced would have been, again, the 50s, and of course the Irish it was Irish Labour that rebuilt, these cities. There were so much destroyed in London during the war, but that was. Those workers that came from Ireland, well, they weren't the most sophisticated. I could, and of course, if you get on a tube and there are 50 people on the tube, or there may be 20 or 30 Irish in that lot, and there's one Irishman who then takes over the whole thing and is loud and vulgar, and that to the other people that's what all the Irish are like, and I've seen that so often.
But there were,
you get a loud voice.
there were opportunities there that weren't here.
Oh well, there were no opportunities here. That was the
And you could move ahead, and if you wanted to.
And of course, you had the attitude again. You know, God, when I met Mrs. Niall Fagan again, she wasn't very pleased with me. You know, how could I? Because if you're any good, if you had to leave the country, you went to America. You only went to England if you had no self-respect, and that was very much. I mean, as you know, Mrs. Fagan's attitude. Well, you didn't try hard enough, and you know, for the hardliners here, that was the answer. Well, you didn't try hard enough. But it was. Now, when you got to think of it, how the hell? I think average wage at that time was about £4 a week.
That's in England?
No, I mean in Ireland.
Okay.
And you know, even, you know, I remember the Connor girls that got work on the buses, and they were earning £7 or something, and thought it was marvellous, and they could come home in nice dresses, and they were doing really well. And it just that difference between the you know, you're really on the breadline here. Well, when I think, you know, what Daddy would have been paid in the forestry, about 4, something like that. Yeah, I know. You know, the changes in cost of living, but yeah, you know, that was. You know, you're on the breadline. There were no.
Any memories, not memories directly of course, but stories that you would hear about Summerhill House, or about any of the people who worked in it, or any stories associated with, given that it was such a central, at one time, such a central thing within the community. It built the village, this mansion of a house and all of that. It was, at one time, it was everything.
Well, I think, you know, there was from that. Well, of course, Summerhill. When you think of it, it was something there over centuries, not just you know, in our time. So, as you know, in other parts of Ireland, I mean, you had the big house, and this was just a masterpiece of architecture. I think designed by Castles. It dominated. If you take the house, the big house, the land that it took such a large area. The village itself, because all the cottages, I think all the properties were owned by Landfords, or had the freehold anyhow, to the land beyond that had come into grandfather's hands. But that was, you know, the life of the people who lived here. You know, that they would be aware. You know, we're part of. You know, you had the big house. You have it was kind of master and. Well, not that he. I don't think any of the family would have had quite that degree of control, but nonetheless they employed so many. That's why, you know, there's a rumour going that the reason it was destroyed maliciously was because Landfords had agreed to allow the Black and Tans to move in there. Well, if that was when you think so many locals were employed there, I mean, that is, I think, a ludicrous rumour. But then again, you know, in the 50s anyway, well, Landfords were gone, the place had been burned. It was still open to all and sundry, and it was the favourite place for many families to go for a Sunday walk to, and of course it was so huge, so much was densely wooded, which is no longer the case, but it was quite an experience to go through it, to go through those woods, and it just had it was marvelous, and you know that local people thought, well, that's you know, we've got this facility, this is ours, and yeah, and there are loads of rumours and all conflicting. So what the real truth? I know Tom Barnard told a story that, and he must have been quite young, that one of the jobs he was given by Lady Landford was to collect all the tea leaves and dry them, and then she had packets distribute the tea to the poor of Summerhill. Well, I said, well, Tom would never. Tom was always absolutely straight, so I'm sure that did happen.
You had a more direct experience of Lady Langford.
Oh yeah, because Tom Barnard, he kept in touch with her. Well, of course he would have been employed by her, but even when that ended with the acquisition of the land here by the Land Commission, and when it was split to forestry and Tom kept in touch. So, and with Harry Fitzsimons, he used to always ask Harriet to take a package, something or other, to Lady Langford. And when Harriet moved on, he used to ask me, and so I met Lady Langford twice, first in Park Lane, or just off Park Lane in London. And you know, she was an imperious lady, but she was quite nice. I remember the first thing she said is, anyone from Summerhill is always welcome here. And she was anxious to ask, you know, was I familiar with, well, like the Rose Garden and different points. And I remember her saying, well, it's not the beautiful park it once was. So that's...
Your second experience was
very different. She'd moved from Park Lane to Chelsea. Well, I don't think in status, area or costs, I wouldn't think would be a great difference. But I surprised her. Of course, that's not the done thing. This would have been in the 60s. And she was going out to visit her friend, Lady something, she told me, and I remember saying, oh, this is from Barnard. It was a cynical, but I declined her offer of a sherry, and when we got downstairs, up to the street, I remember she said, well, I'm going this way, you're going that way. the other direction. So, no, it was pretty cool. And I heard afterwards, well, it was Mammy who told me, that there was a curt letter to Tom. And it began, not dear Tom, but Barnard. It was, but she was, if it's true that she lived to over 100, she would have been in her 90s then, so I think could be forgiven. But I gather that the general feeling was that Langford was a very approachable, a very pleasant man, but she was a different character.
And would it have been him? He might have been the seventh Lord. Did he return here at some stage? You have some knowledge of a letter that.
No, that would have been a relative, a connection, not him.
Right. So there was some contact with the family after.
Oh yes. I think there's a Welsh connection.
Yeah.
There's connections in Australia, I never knew the detail. But I know different people called her Mammy, because, well, probably because living there, what was the gate lodge or the gatekeeper. I often wondered, it must have been pretty fit, whoever was there, that had to go out and open the gate when the carriages came down that avenue.
Yeah, we've covered a great deal of ground. Just one character that maybe you knew a little of, a Judy Martin.
Well, the truth is, I thought I knew, but again, how old was I? My memory of Judy, was pretty prominent, but if an old hag who was someone we could make fun of, as children, remember her as highly eccentric, everything from the hair, from the dress, just all over the place, and living in a tumble down, where I remember her, but which would be, opposite Fairley's. What is
So
that?
it's just down on the same side as Dicey's, a little bit further down.
Oh, but a fair bit further down, because you've got the. Just again, when you're going back to childhood memories, you can make bad mistakes because
Everything's changed.
What you remember as being distant was in fact actually very close. Now, what you say, I think where she would have been more accurately, if you think of the chemist is now, it would be, well, to get a more accurate thing, you have a boreen at the other side, on the right. Now, that was Farrelly's, the last house, and Judy's was right across the road from there.
Right.
So that's where and so you had two tumble down places, and at that time in the 50s, before he married, Paddy Bagnall and Jack Nugent.
Tom Fields, was it?
I don't remember.
Sorry, Jack Nugent, go ahead.
Jack Nugent. No, Tom Fields was in the, up from Farrelly's. He was, Farrelly's was the end. I gather there was somebody else, but I just remember Clark's, and then Tom Fields. Tom Fields' garage, that group. The other side of the road, I just remember that Judy Martin or Amelia. She was Miss Amelia or Judy Martin. People that are, or just Judy indicated. But I was in there once, and it was rather with cause. My memory is just, of an open fireplace, lots of smoke, colour black, everything black, and no, that's
She did live before that, I think, right.
yeah, where the barracks is now, aren't they?
And maybe it might even have been encroached on where the present road is, right out at the corner of where the stores was, or where the stores is. Yeah.
I never.
So she lived obviously to quite an age, because she was prominent during the tan period.
Yeah.
And she was still there in the 50s.
Yes.
So yeah, she may have been quite old when she, but a celebrity apparently, and very politically involved or interested.
For instance, Nolene Pearl remembers her and remembers the shop, and well, I suppose Nolene in those days, and I mean, she was from Dublin, so she'd be down to visit her aunt, who was Mrs. Farrelly, and which is how she comes to know the Holmeses, or know grandpas, and remember him so well, and Judy's shop and what she sold there. Well, as I remember, when I knew or met Judy, I don't think she would have been capable, or anybody would have wanted to buy something from her, because she was just totally disintegrated.
So it was, in many respects, to summarise, more good times, more fun times than bad. The best, to conclude, if you like, the best memories you have locally, and the worst. Maybe you've named some of both already.
Well, I think what tends to happen with everybody, I think you remember the best, and the worst are sometimes too painful or uncomfortable to carry on. The best, well, certainly. I suppose everyone's, teenage is a marvelous time in one way. You're feeling more freedom. You're tossing off the well, maybe not successfully, but you're finding your character as opposed to your parents' character. It's the same. It's I know for me, I discovered cards and spent a lot of time in Flynn's. Tom Flynn's, his mother had died, so Jimmy was keeping the house together, but Jimmy always disappeared in the evening. So we had card games. Catherine was more or less in charge of the housekeeping, but as Eiley Riley, she'd remember while we were reminiscing, and said it was a wonderful time because none of us had money, and we would argue. There'd be rows about a penny or 2 pennies with the card games, and that was brilliant. I think we were just satisfied with little because we knew no more. But that the whole thing revolved around the dance hall. Well, the dances were now Dangan for many years. Kid Kelly, the gold and silver, Scrabbles. That was the Sunday night entertainment. if you could get further afield, Summerhill didn't have a cinema, but and of course going up to Dublin, since the Dunboyne route was the main Mullingar route, now that's Enfield, but on the big day out, the treat was always a day in Dublin, and but in these days, one thing that is different, in every house where there's a family, you'd have a collection of games, everything from rings, board on the wall, to darts, to table games, Ludo, snakes and ladders. I don't think Monopoly had arrived at that time, and I don't think it would have been of great interest. But generally, and what has changed so much, we provided every household. I don't think there was exceptions. Those who were good or bad at it, but we all provided our own entertainment. And I think something that was the norm in schools starting from a very early age. If there's a party, you have to have a party piece, and you have to do a recitation or sing a song, but everybody has to, perform something. And that was, again, expected. And, in some families, they were very adept at that. And they were the storytellers. And something that I feel, the eloquence, the gift of, as conversationalists. The Irish have always been brilliant, but God, are they today? Are the young people today? If you're stuck in the cell phone all the time, and or if everything has been cut to a minimum for texting, well, I don't know, but I'm not very hopeful because some things have changed. They've always been those with the gift of the gab, and and everything is spontaneous. And again, are they still there? Yes, maybe, but I think not generally in the way we once had.
So the whole community connection and interaction is quite different from your early memories.
Oh, yeah.
How it is now and how it was then. It's very different.
Very different. It's like another. Well, I think what we accuse the English, and there's no doubt about it. English generally, and of course, in saying that, I immediately stop myself because, again, there are big changes that have taken place in England and across the way, and with I think generally the English have always been quite conservative compared with here. But hell, you've got a working class area now in England that is so quite mixed and influenced by other nationals, and there's nothing conservative there. They can be very outspoken and open. So there's been. I think they've kind of gone through the spin dryer.
Well, you've covered a huge amount of ground, Tom. There, really, really grateful for that, and so will future generations. not just within your own family, but beyond. So, thanks on behalf of everyone for that. Great.
Well, I hope something is of use.
Of course.